In my younger years, which are quite a few years back now, but in my younger years, I grew up in rural areas on basically, I guess what you would call out here, you'd refer to them as hobby farms, because they just weren't that big. And my dad always had another job. He always worked in the lumber mills full time, but we always had, a few acres out in the country where we could, have a milk cow or two, and we'd raise a few calves and pigs, and occasionally we'd raise chickens. We generally had a few acres, to pasture the cows on in the summertime, and a few more acres of hay ground so we could provide, food for the critters over the winter. And my first paying job, where I actually got real wages, was working for a cattle rancher in western Idaho. See, that's my past, but even with my rural upbringing, I can't, with any honesty, claim to be an expert on farming, especially, the type and the scale of farming that's commonly practiced in these around here. So I'm grateful for the patient folks who have put up with me as I go out there with them, and they've answered my endless questions. And they've graciously added to my meager storehouse of knowledge about farming. And through the years, as I've slowly added to my understanding of farming, one thing remains constant in that understanding, and that is that farming, if it is to have any chance at all of success, it needs to be intentional. The stuff just doesn't happen by accident. There needs to be a clear understanding of what you want to get from your farming. What crops you're going to plant and all these other things. And what you want to get out of your farming efforts, as I understand it, is more than you put in, right? You want to harvest more seeds than you planted. You want for your calves to gain weight. You want for your herd to either increase in size or quality or both, and so on. Successful farming, at least in my meagerly informed understanding, means doing that which you need to receive an increase. Okay? Making sense so far? But what really does this talk about farming have to do with us here? This church, this community of faith. While wind-driven snow blows by outside and no farming is actually taking place in the fields at this moment, what does that mean about us? What does it have to do with us? That's quite a bit. I want you to think back to that 37th Psalm that I read to you a little bit ago. Did you catch the third verse? I'll repeat it. Trust the Lord and do good. Live in the land and farm faithfulness. But what does that mean? What does that verse mean? What does that really tell us? Well, first off, we're told that we should trust the Lord, meaning that we're to believe in God and to believe that God's teachings, that God's promises are worthwhile, and to hold on to them and to strive to do what he tells us to do. And then we're told to actually apply those teachings by doing good. God doesn't call us to go do evil. He wants us to do good. We are not called to oppress or neglect or exclude or harm the people around us. We are called to do good things with our lives and with the gifts that God has given us. And where are we to do these good things? Well, the good news is that we don't have to go to the far side of the planet, right? Because we're called to live in the land. We're called to do these things right where we are. To do these good things right where we are. Physically, spiritually, emotionally. Do these good things right where we are. And then, of all things, we are told to farm faithfulness. Farm faithfulness. What does that mean to you? What does that mean, farm faithfulness? Well, faithfulness can be defined as the act of being faithful, right? And to be faithful is to be loyal, to intentionally and steadfastly do those things that the one to whom you are being faithful would have you do. And in the context of this 37th Psalm, the faithfulness is to be directed toward God. Okay? So if we're going to farm faithfulness, that means we have to be intentional about doing what we need to do to grow and improve our faith in God with the goal of increasingly being able to do that which God calls us to do, which is to bear more fruit for his kingdom. Okay. It's plain enough, isn't it? Well, what really does farming faithfulness look like in our day-to-day life? Our lives. Well, one thing, if we're to farm faithfulness, we actually have to get up and get out and actually do those things that God calls us to do. What does he call us to do? We see evidence of that in our gospel lesson today, right? Jesus, speaking to the people of God, which includes you and me, says, "But I say to you who are willing to hear." Oh, I love that line. To you who are willing to hear. That would be those of us who are intending to farm faithfulness, by the way. Those of us who really want to hear what God has to say to us. And he says to those of us who actually want to do what he tells us to do, to love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, offer the other one as well. If someone takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt either. Give to everyone who asks, and don't demand your things back from those who take them. Treat people in the same way that you want them to treat you. Doesn't say treat them in the same way they actually treat you. Treat them in the way that you want for them to treat you. See, that basically sums up how we farm faithfulness through our interactions with our neighbors. Because if we're serious about growing our faith with God, then we need to be equally serious about actually doing what God tells us to do. And God is really clear that you should treat people in the same way you want them to treat you. We're told this over and over and over again in this handy-dandy little book that we call the Bible. Treat people in the same way you want them to treat you. Think about what that means as a practical application. You see, all of us want to be valued for who we are. We have worth, we have value. We'd like other people to acknowledge that. And we would prefer not to be devalued or deemed to be of little or no worth because of who we are. None of us want to be told that we have to change who we are into something that we're not, that we can't be, so that we could be accepted by others. None of us want to hear that. None of us want to be treated that way. So neither should we treat others in that fashion. We're called again today to love and to value our neighbors, even those who are different from us. To value them in the same way that we want to be valued ourselves. We are called again today, you and I, to love those who disagree with us. To be kind to those who might say mean or unkind things to us. And to pray for those people whom we think are mistreating us. Didn't say it was going to be easy. Said you had to do it. Pray for those who irritate you or mistreat you, because it really does work. I know this. If you keep at it, I've learned through personal experience that it's really, really, really hard to stay mad at someone that you've been earnestly praying for their health and their well-being. So pray for those around you, even if they haven't been nice. And even if you can't tell if the other person has benefited from your praying, I know there is a person who has, and that would be you. You are the one who reaps the benefit of a more peace-filled soul when you pray for others, all others. We are called, again today, you and I, to give. And to give not because we expect some kind of repayment for our kindness, but rather to give as much as we can, simply because we can. Because we have things that we can give. We're called to give. And that's really simple logic, by the way, because if you hand something over with the expectation of getting something back, you're not really giving, you're investing. You expect them to give you something back. If you give just because you can give, that's giving. So give. Give because God has blessed you with this amazing and marvelous ability to do just that. Give financially. Give food or clothing. Give the gift of your time. Spend time with people. Listen to the stories that your neighbors have to tell, because everybody has a story to tell. And you give value to them when you stop what you're doing and listen to that story. You can easily give the gift of a caring and attentive heart to someone who needs company. Just go be with them. Farm faithfulness. And if we're serious about doing that, if we're serious about farming faithfulness, we'll avoid those things that are not productive. Right? I doubt that any of you who are raising cattle go out there with a four-wheeler and chase them around and around and around and around in the pasture, running pounds off your stock and beating them up. You don't do that because it doesn't work. If you've got a grain crop out in the field, you don't invite all of your friends to come over and have drag races up and down the wheat field, because it doesn't work. That harms what you're trying to do. If we're serious about farming faithfulness, we'll avoid those things that are not productive or that are detrimental to us. We'll avoid those things. Being judgmental or choosing not to forgive others will not profit your souls, not one bit. Those things actually bring harm to us. If you really want to farm faithfulness, well, then simply do the things that God tells you to do. Be kind. Be helpful. Love those around you simply because you can. And remember, farming expects an increase. And so it is with us when we farm faithfulness. Jesus tells us that our faithfulness will bring us that increase. When he says, give and it will be given to you, a good portion packed down, firmly shaken, and overflowing will fall into your lap. The portion you give will determine the portion that you receive in return. And the language in that verse indicates that we get the maximum possible return for our behavior. A good portion, packed down, shaken together, and overflowing will fall into your lap. So go and get you some of that. Unleash your inner farmer. Farm faithfulness through the obedience of God's will by loving your neighbors in the very same way that you want to be loved yourself. And when you do that, blessings will come your way. I know this to be true. So go and do that. Amen.